On the last edition of Soccer Files, we talked about how Major League Soccer came to be and what its first 6 months of existence was like after earning the certification as the Division I professional soccer league in the United States. That led us into an announcement at Soldier Field 2 days before the start of the 1994 World Cup, where 7 locations were announced as being awarded MLS teams: Boston, New York, New Jersey, Washington, Los Angeles, San Jose, and Columbus. 5 more spots were up for grabs, and 11 areas were put into a secondary group that were competing for it. The World Cup started in mid-June and really set this country alight with soccer conversation, not just about the great tournament that was going on all over the country, but also what was coming next. There were lots of twists and turns along the way. Major League Soccer at this stage was still planning on kicking off in early 1995. This edition of Soccer Files will take us up until the end of 1994 and explain a little bit about what happened next and how MLS got underway for year one. Hello, I'm Jason Longshore. Thanks for hanging out for another edition of Soccer Files, looking at how MLS came to be as it celebrates its 25th year of play in 2020. Where we left off, 7 locations were announced as MLS team sites. A couple of them you might have raised an eyebrow about when I read those off a minute ago. We'll get to that. We'll explain it. We'll get to how that happened. But you also had 11 that were still competing. You had players starting to be talked about, with the U.S. qualifying for the round of 16 in the World Cup. United States men's soccer players were getting a lot of attention for one of the first times in U.S. soccer history. And a lot of the debate was, would these players play in Major League Soccer? A number of them were salaried players for the U.S. Soccer Federation, but there were some that were playing in teams around the world. There were also more that were getting attention because of the World Cup and the potential that they could be going to teams around the world. So it was a very interesting time leading into that round of 16 match on July 4th on ABC, USA and Brazil. We know how it turned out. Tab Ramos injured severely after an elbow from Leonardo. He was red carded. Bebeto ended up scoring the goal. The U.S. was eliminated at Stanford Stadium in Palo Alto, 1-0. The match drew a 10.5 on ABC. It was the most watched soccer game in U.S. TV history at the time. After the U.S. was eliminated, Alan Rothenberg, who was heading up Major League Soccer, who was also heading up the U.S. Soccer Federation, who was also overseeing everything with the World Cup. Alan Rothenberg was a pretty busy guy. He said, "We said we would put on a great World Cup and use it to launch professional soccer in the United States. With the team clearly doing well, that is a clear boost to Major League Soccer. We have to make sure people are realistic. Major League Soccer will not present World Cup level play week in and week out. We want to play to 80,000 fans every week, but Major League Soccer is a long-term, serious effort. We're going to put quality soccer on the field and build it over time. It took the NBA 50 years. It took the NFL 70 years, and Major League Baseball about 120 years. I hope people will understand that 1995 is only going to be a start. It's going to be a good start." After the Brazil loss, that's when you started to really hear about, can MLS sign a lot of these players who represented the United States? There were reports that the average Major League Soccer salary would be around $70,000 a year. Eric Winaldo was playing at Bochum in Germany and reportedly was on about $350,000 a year at that time. John Harkes said he had not been approached yet by the league or the U.S. Soccer Federation about Major League Soccer. July 10th, First time we heard anything about a team name potentially. And it was reported in local papers that the Columbus team would be called the Columbus Eclipse. That was the current favorite for the team name for Columbus, Ohio. Ultimately did not happen. I'll let you guys judge if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Dave Durr was in place in the MLS office as the director of player personnel by this point. And he was involved not just with the U.S. players at the World Cup, but others who were speaking about being interested in coming to play in MLS. Thomas Ravelli, Sweden's goalkeeper, was one of those. He actually did play in Major League Soccer. Laurie Calloway of San Jose said he had talked to multiple members of Cameroon's national team about coming to MLS. Cities that were still trying to get an MLS franchise, they used the World Cup matches to try to sell ticket deposits where they could be on site, where they could be around a World Cup match. They tried to use the hype of the World Cup to sell more deposits, to get the interest of MLS. Remember, Columbus knocked it out of the park. They were the ones who led the way. They were maybe the biggest surprise with selling season ticket deposits, and it's a big reason why they ended up getting a team in that first group. And really, you could say they were the first team in Major League Soccer. There were reports during the final week of the World Cup that the start of MLS could be postponed by 4 months to 1 year. And this was supposedly leaking out through conversations with U.S. men's national team players that they were having with MLS organizers. The plan was to start in April of 95. So at this stage, they were already looking at potentially starting in the fall of 95 or starting in 1996. And this was just reports at this stage by the middle of July. July 14th was a big day for MLS. Nike and Mitre were announced as the first sponsors of MLS. Nike was set to provide uniforms and apparel for 6 teams. Mitre would be the official ball of the league, and both signed 4-year deals. Nike was also announced at this time as a new U.S. Soccer Federation sponsor starting in 1995. That was a big deal. U.S. Soccer had been with Adidas for a long time, and you'll remember the denim kits from the 94 World Cup. That was the last year of Adidas with U.S. Soccer. And since the beginning of 1995, U.S. Soccer has been a Nike property. MLS was attached in some way to all of this conversation. Nike got on board at the same time with U.S. Soccer and with MLS. July 15th, one of the cities that was being linked as a possible MLS location, and still in that secondary group that was going to submit, that was going to have 5 groups out of it that would join MLS at this time, that was the plan, Atlanta. They were announced as an American Professional Soccer League city for 1995. The APSL didn't get the Division I sanctioning. They kept on going. They had teams come and go. It was very frantic for the APSL. But July 15th, they announced that the Atlanta Magic, who were currently in the USISL, which was a lower tier, would be joining the APSL. The league had a press conference in Los Angeles to also announce that it was applying for Division I status with the U.S. Soccer Federation again. The Detroit Wheels of the USISL was announced in June as joining the APSL for the next season. So you had Detroit and Atlanta July 15th that were on deck to join the APSL. 2 of the cities in the APSL, these 2 now, Atlanta and Detroit, were still trying to get into MLS, separate groups, but it was still a possibility. In Vancouver, and Vancouver was not looked at as an MLS city at this point. MLS was not looking at Canadian cities yet. That took a while. But Dominic Mobilio of Vancouver, he's one of the top players in the league. He said that the top Vancouver 86ers were making about $12,000 for the 5-month season. So MLS, the average salary at this point was rumored to be around $70,000 a year. Top Vancouver 86ers in the APSL were making about $12,000 for a 5-month season. A lot of players in the APSL did play indoor, which was still a source of revenue at that time and a source of salaries at that time. So a lot of guys played 5 months here and 5 months there. Keep that in mind as we talk about comparing the leagues as we go. Also on July 15th, Bill Sage of MLS said that the announcement of the remaining MLS cities would likely be in mid-August. Peter Moore, Reebok's VP of Global Marketing at this time, said, if the MLS doesn't make it, it will be a long time before anyone puts up the money to try an outdoor league again. Gives you a little bit of the glimpse of the attitude towards outdoor professional soccer in the United States, even right after an incredibly successful World Cup. Alan Rothenberg, after that World Cup final, he said, our goals are all long-term. The goal is within 10 years to be in a position to be on the same level as the three major sports, baseball, football, and basketball. Sunil Gulati joined MLS as a consultant around this time as well. The World Cup final was on July 17th, Brazil and Italy from the Rose Bowl. Got a 12.4 overnight rating for ABC television, a 29 share. The final ratings ended up at 9.5 for the national rating with a 24 share, the highest rated soccer game ever on network television. And it those ratings ended up being better than the U.S.-Brazil rating. The overnight rating kind of came down a bit for that one. ABC averaged a 5.3 for its 11 games that it aired on over-the-air television at that time. That was up 18% from the predictions before the tournament. Everybody's pretty happy about the way the World Cup went in mid-July. July 21st, APSL chairman William De La Peña said that his league would have 12 to 16 teams in 1995. They didn't quite get there. The Houston Force was in the league at that time. They folded almost immediately after the statement over the weekend of July 23rd, 24th. De La Peña said that his team, the LA Salsa, would join the Mexican First Division. The Salsa drew, and the APSL season started very late in 1994. They didn't want to compete with the World Cup. They drew 2,148 for their home opener on July 24th. The Salsa were planning to join the Mexican First Division and leave APSL, but he was the chairman, De La Peña, of the APSL. They were going to expand huge from this point, almost double for 1995, but they had a team fold a couple days after the announcement. It gives you a sense of where the APSL was at this stage. Indianapolis made some news on July 22nd. Reports locally were that MLS was looking at using the 12,000-seat track stadium at IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. Kunst Soccer Stadium was a long shot as well. It only had 7,000 seats. The Butler Bowl was still a possibility, but the school didn't have money to make renovations happen, and other funding sources were not coming together as of yet. In Indy, local TV ratings for that World Cup final were 1/3 of what they were in LA, Washington, and Boston. Projections early on, the league was expecting to lose $63.6 million from 1993 when it first was formed through 1997, and that would be year 3 at this stage. They were expecting to lose almost $30 million in year number 1. That was based off an average attendance projection at this stage of 12,500. Again, it's a snapshot of where they were thinking things would be straight out of the gates and what their long-term planning was. And Rothenberg has consistently said at this stage, long-term, long-term, long-term. They're not expecting this to be an overnight success. Alexi Lalas was one of the huge stars of the 94 World Cup. He was on late-night television. The goatee got everybody's attention. He was singing songs. He was playing guitar. He was everywhere. He wasn't everywhere in the United States for long because on July 27th, a loan deal from the U.S. Soccer Federation, who had Alexi Lalas' contract, a loan deal for the U.S. Soccer Federation to loan him to Padova in Italy was finalized. The agreement was set up to allow Lalas to return for Major League Soccer, which was still set to start in April of 95 at this stage. So he was going to go play in Serie A, first U.S. player to play in Serie A for the 94-95 season and be back in time for the start of the 95 season, which would probably rule him out of the entire season in Serie A. That was the plan in late July. MLS, at some point during this, it came out in late July, they approached Jerry Jones about buying the rights to a Dallas team. He wasn't interested, but he didn't rule out being involved in some way. That was one of the more interesting nuggets I found in my research, that they did approach Jerry Jones. Nothing happened, but that was the plan. July 29th, Atlanta's deposit numbers finally got over 1,500. That nearly doubled. That came with the news that the renovation plan for DeKalb Memorial Stadium was approved by the DeKalb County School Board. As we know, it never happened, but that was where things were going at this stage. August of 94, Detroit. Things got a little weird. Political battles in play. The U.S. ISL Wheels had joined the APSL. They felt like they were being excluded from that World Cup organizing effort. The World Cup organizing effort shared lots of personnel with the MLS bid because Detroit was still in the running for an MLS team. So you had a lot of friction between an existing team in Detroit and the World Cup organizing group that was trying to bring a new team. And yes, this gives you a sense of the political battles that were going on in 1994 in U.S. soccer. And they were, sadly, nothing new, and they still continue on today. Tampa looked in good shape to get one of those additional teams. They were trying to nail down the lease agreement with Tampa Stadium. The area that was tricky was specifically around sponsorship opportunities for signage, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the rights to a lot of that. So you were trying to carve out ways that an MLS team could sell sponsorships and make money at Tampa Stadium. There was a phone line set up. I don't think it still is functioning. I don't want you to try it, so I'm not going to say what the number was. It was a 1-800 number. That was set up for information on playing, coaching, or working in MLS. And the reason why is they were expected to have open tryouts in the fall of 1994. MLS Senior Vice President Harley Frankel made an announcement in early August saying that they were expecting to make the new additional team announcements in late August or early September. Frankel said that Indianapolis had a decent chance, liked the facility at IUPUI, but wanted to increase the capacity from 12,000 seats to more in the 17 to 20,000 seat range. August 13th was the date for the U.S. Soccer Federation presidential election. The last time around, it had been very contentious, and Alan Rothenberg kind of parachuted in at the last minute, defeated Werner Fricker, took over. A lot of things happened after Rothenberg took over. Now, Rothenberg was up for re-election. He's coming off of a successful World Cup. He's also coming off of his new baby, MLS, getting the Division I sanctioning, and that didn't make a lot of people happy. One of the people who wasn't happy was Richard Groff, who was the U.S. Soccer Federation treasurer at the time. Hank DeBoerds was a U.S. Soccer executive. He was also running. Louis A. Palivos was an Illinois State Association president. He was also running. Rothenberg, a few days before the election, said, "It's hard to understand, especially considering the last 4 years, and not just the World Cup, but everything else we've accomplished, that anyone would be dissatisfied. But that's life. People have their own particular self-interests involved. When it's all over, we'll win in a landslide." He didn't. He won, but it was narrow. João Havelange, the president of FIFA, campaigned on Rothenberg's behalf at the U.S. Soccer Federation AGM in San Diego. That shows you also, how seriously FIFA took the United States. And coming off of a World Cup where it felt like it was a bit of a coming out party for the United States on the world stage, they wanted Rothenberg to stay in charge at the Federation. They put some work in to try to make sure that happened. The first ballot had Rothenberg with 48.8%, Groff with 46.9%, DeBoerds had 4.2%. DeBoerds withdrew after the first vote. The thought was maybe that 4.2 goes to Groff. Rothenberg won on the second ballot with 53.4%. It ultimately did not. Rothenberg only got the votes from the U.S. ISL of the existing pro leagues. The APSL and the two indoor leagues voted for Groff. Rothenberg got the support of the amateur division as well. 70% of the youth and amateur vote went to Alan Rothenberg. Richard Groff on FIFA's involvement, and this upset a lot of people in the previous election. Richard Groff was right there with it after this one. Said, FIFA is very insensitive to the operation of individuals with their constituents in the United States Soccer Federation. They didn't need to push so hard. FIFA is so scared to death that if Allen is not in front of MLS, it won't succeed. They took that one step further. If Allen is not president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, MLS won't succeed. It was all totally inappropriate. One reason, allegedly, why U.S. ISL teams were in support of Alan Rothenberg was that they were expecting to get money from MLS to help develop players. Player development was actually being talked about a little bit at this time. It wasn't a primary focus because you just had to get everything off the ground, but there was some thought into how player development would look. Middle of August, Bill Sage, the COO of MLS, said that the league had a list of 450 American soccer players who were deemed capable of competing at the level MLS wants. He said that MLS would not tamper with existing contracts. William De La Pena of the APSL said, that's part of the market economy of the United States. Whatever it takes to be the best league, we're willing to do. APSL is going to compete. Our owners are wealthy people. One of those wealthy people was Amancio Suarez, who we've talked about before. He was the owner of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. He met on August 16th with Alan Rothenberg and was encouraged by the conversation, said that Rothenberg had become more flexible in putting Major League Soccer together. Suarez wanted to see MLS and the APSL work together. Wayne Huizenga could join that ownership group in Fort Lauderdale/Miami if that team goes to MLS rather than stays in the APSL. And Huizenga could also be potentially motivated, according to reports, to build a soccer stadium at Blockbuster Park, which was the former Joe Robbie Stadium, which has changed names many, many times, and now it is the Hard Rock Stadium. Huizenga was the owner of Blockbuster at that time. August 19th, some bad news in Atlanta as there were no financial guarantees for the $9 million renovation project at DeKalb Memorial Stadium. John Lupton was the CEO of Atlanta Management Services Incorporated. He was heading up the project. He said that money was coming from area banks and he'd have a verbal agreement in a couple of weeks. MLS COO Bill Sage said that other cities were further along. Sage said it didn't look good for Atlanta to be an inaugural member, but they could be considered for an expansion team in 1997, in the third year of the league's existence. August 22nd, Paul Caligiuri, one of the all-time greats for the U.S. men's national team, one of the first U.S. players to go play in Europe, he met with MLS representatives to discuss signing a contract with the league. He had reportedly put off offers from Germany, England, Japan to talk to MLS before he made a decision about what he was going to do for the 94-95 season and looking ahead to the start of MLS in 1995. Let's move on to September of 94. MLS officials met in Los Angeles during the weekend of September 3rd and 4th to discuss the rest of the cities who were hoping to join the league, that group of 11. The announcement was expected at this point in mid-September, so you were coming down to that announcement day. At the end of the previous month in August, Chicago re-entered the conversation. They had not been part of it. There was new management at Soldier Field, and it looked like Chicago might be a late entry into that group that was trying to get in. Tampa and Chicago were looking good to get in, according to reports at the time. Other favorites appeared to be Indianapolis, Denver, and either Kansas City or Dallas, looking to round out the 12-team league that was being proposed at this point. People kept getting involved at this point and getting interested. A September 7th Star Tribune article said that Bud Grant, legendary with the Minnesota Vikings, and a friend, Gunter Harz, were thinking about buying the U.S. ISL Minnesota Thunder and moving them into Major League Soccer. They were looking at potentially expanding the seating at Blaine's National Sports Center. The Thunder had contemplated joining the APSL or moving into the new USISL Pro Division for the 95 season, along with this possibility of jumping into Major League Soccer. The article, and this is a very important point, also discussed the potential for MLS to be reconsidering its single-entity plan due to investors balking at the idea. It was a brand new concept, and investors looking to buy a team were looking at buying a team. They had to be sold on the idea of a single-entity league, and MLS was maybe thinking about how to manage that at this point. September 8th, big announcement. You'll remember Richard Groff, defeated running for the presidency of the U.S. Soccer Federation. He became the new commissioner of the APSL. Very interesting, running against Alan Rothenberg for president of the federation, and now he is the commissioner of the league competing with Rothenberg's league. Not a big surprise that's the way things went down. September 13th, Dean Linke was hired as the chief press officer for Major League Soccer. He was the press officer for the U.S. men's national team during the World Cup and for the Olympic team in 1992. An open tryout camp was tentatively set up for Tampa Bay in November 19th and 20th, trying to start making those moves to filling out rosters looking ahead to the 95 season. Bill Sage also said that 2 or 3 cities would be named fairly soon, and that was on September 15th, and that the remaining ones would be named later. He said there's not a deadline, but MLS wanted to open offices in different cities by October 1st. At this stage, Indianapolis and Kansas City were considered favorites for those spots. There were concerns about the New York side of things because it didn't look like they were going to have an acceptable stadium for the spring of 1995. Denver was having some sponsorship exclusivity issues at Mile High Stadium, similar to what Tampa Stadium was dealing with. And Sage also confirmed that MLS was talking to Chicago and South Florida, who were not originally part of that group of 11 that they were considering. Sage also spoke on Sacramento and said that they did not have enough corporate and community support at this stage. Kobe Jones, another one of those stars of the U.S. men's national team in the 1994 World Cup. He was under contract at Coventry City in England. According to Jones, his contract provides the flexibility for me to play for Major League Soccer next year. Very interesting that U.S. players had these kinds of clauses in their deals. Remember, the Lawless loan to Padova had something similar as well. Bill Sage spoke to another outlet and said that the league had plans for a mid-December scouting combine, an early February 1995 draft, an early March training camp with a season opener tentatively set for April 22nd, 1995. Pontiac expressed an interest in a sponsorship from the league. They said they hadn't heard from Major League Soccer. They had great success with World Cup. They wanted to continue in the soccer realm, and they were interested in MLS. Not sure where things fell apart there. Didn't really make a lot of sense. Richard Groff said that Alan Rothenberg sent an invitation to the 7 APSL teams to join Major League Soccer on September 20th. The teams that were invited were the current 7 APSL teams: Fort Lauderdale Strikers, Colorado Foxes, Los Angeles Salsa, Seattle Sounders, Toronto Rockets, Montreal Impact, and the Vancouver 86ers. This is the first time that the Canadian side of things had been mentioned. And this is coming from Richard Groff, who was the commissioner of the league that these teams were in, saying that Rothenberg sent an invitation. Very strange for him to play that card. He later announced that, quote, "Our ownership is not interested in any single entity proposition." And he said that the APSL owner should respond to Rothenberg's invitation no later than October 3rd. Apex, a uniform supplier, announced that it had signed a 4-year deal to be the uniform supplier for 2 MLS teams at the end of September. That one ended up not happening. Not sure how that one fell apart. Let's move on to October. A little bit more on the Fort Lauderdale Strikers situation. According to local reports, they lost roughly $600,000 in the 1994 APSL season. They averaged less than 2,000 fans per game. Those losses were offset a little bit by youth clinics, playing international exhibitions, and sponsoring a pre-World Cup match at the Orange Bowl between Colombia and AC Milan. APSL, you had 7 teams that finished the 1994 season. Houston folded during the season. Atlanta and Detroit were announced for 1995. There were also rumors about a return to Tampa Bay for 95. The Rowdies had dropped out of the league before the 94 season, tried to move to Jacksonville. It ended up not working out, but there were rumors of Tampa Bay coming in for 95. That would have put the APSL at 10 teams If everybody came back, Atlanta, Detroit, and Tampa Bay join. Not how it actually played out. Steve Weish wrote an article in the Miami Herald about that MLS offer to APSL owners. Weish wrote that the offer was for the APSL owners to pay a $5 million entry fee to join the single-entity league. Richard Groff was quoted as saying, "They prefer to own their teams and develop players in their marketplace and be responsible for 100% of their income and expenses." He also said, this is Richard Groff speaking in a conference call, quote, "Our goal is clearly to be the Division I league." On October 12th, Major League Soccer announced that it would hold 2-day tryouts in 14 different cities. This was the proposed plan for that. Dublin, Ohio, October 29th and 30th. Indianapolis, November 5th and 6th. Chicago, October 29th and 30th. Littleton, Colorado, November 12th and 13th. San Jose, California, December 17th and 18th. Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, October 22nd and 23rd. Tampa, November 19th and 20th. And Union, New Jersey, October 22nd and 23rd. The others not exactly nailed down on the specific location, but Atlanta, November 19th and 20th. Dallas, December 3rd and 4th. Kansas City, November 12th and 13th. Los Angeles, December 17th and 18th. Portland, December 3rd and 4th, and Washington, D.C., November 6th and 7th. The league met with potential investors on October 13th, and this is where a lot of decisions were made. Reports the next day started to come out that MLS would launch with only 10 teams as opposed to 12. One reason why was New York and New Jersey were stuck with venues that had not agreed to convert to grass yet. New York was set to play at Hofstra. New Jersey was going to play at Giant Stadium. They had not got the agreements done to convert those to grass yet, so those two were being held up at this point, and that could be two teams that sit out to give you 10 for 1995. That was the plan at this point. On October 15th, the APSL had their championship match. It was Colorado and Montreal. It drew 8,169 fans in Montreal. Ahead of the match, Groff said, quote, "We're talking potential new owners in Detroit, Atlanta, Long Island, and Florida, and we want to have a national TV program in the next 12 months. We've been talking with the Turner people and Sports Channel Prime, and we're excited about RDS and TSN in Canada." The first MLS tryouts were in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, October 22nd and 23rd. Edward Parham was the MLS Boston representative and point of contact. The idea was to have these tryouts all over the country and regional trials tentatively scheduled for December in Florida. On October 25th, Alan Rothenberg in New York said, quote, "Obviously, the later in the game it gets, the more you have to analyze whether to start in 95 or 96. Sure, it's a possibility. Everything is possible." Farouk Qureshi, formerly of the Tampa Bay Rowdies and a possible GM of a team in Tampa, was quoted as saying, "It's real important to the future of the game that the professional league is successful, and if delaying 1 year will do that, that's what needs to be done." Rothenberg followed up by saying, "I hope within the next 10 days to 2 weeks we will be able to make our announcement." And he said he was circulating legal documents for signatures. At some point in October, according to Graham Jones of the LA Times, MLS reportedly agreed to drop plans to move into Denver due to the APSL's Colorado Foxes. As you'll figure out as we go through these Soccer Files episodes, things were very fluid at this time because you'll know that the Colorado Rapids launched in year one of the league, and yes, here you go. Early November 1994, it was a sad day for soccer fans in Atlanta who were hoping for Major League Soccer to come to town. They withdrew the bid. Atlanta bidders withdrew the team's bid. They didn't have a suitable stadium due to the issues with the Cab Memorial. The league was also reluctant to launch a team. right around the Olympics in 1996. The bidders wanted to allow the Atlanta APSL team to also have center stage in 1995. So Atlanta took a step back. They withdrew their bid. Bill Ward wrote an article in the Tampa Tribune on November 6th that Rothenberg went to Japan to try to convince the Dentsu conglomerate to invest in Major League Soccer. Bill Ward also wrote that Lamar Hunt, Jerry Jones, and Robert Kraft were all interested in investing in MLS. Ward said that, quote, "To be a success in this country, a league has to throw around loads of cash, be noisy and brash, just like the NFL and NBA." Graham Jones of the LA Times wrote that Rothenberg was looking at launching the league in April of 96. And he said that 6 of MLS's proposed 10 cities had investors. He included, with that original 7 that had already been announced, Chicago, Kansas City, and Tampa. And he said 6 of those 10 had investors already. Jones also wrote that Reebok was frustrated with the delay to 1996. They were on board as a supplier. Kevin Payne, at this time, was the vice president of Soccer USA Partners. He was a potential MLS investor. He said, quote, "I'm not sure that anybody's ever put together a league structure quite like this before. It's like many investments. Everybody's sort of looking around saying, well, I'll jump in when you jump in. At some point, you have to get to the point where everybody's willing to hold hands and all jump in together. I think that's what Allen is working toward now, early in November of 1994. Peter Moore of Reebok, and this is after Graham Jones said Reebok was frustrated with the delay to 1996. Peter Moore said, quote, "I'll support Allen on this issue. I'd rather it not start off half-assed and start off in 96 than to get off to a poor start and once again invite the scorn and ridicule of the general press and media who are going to be against it from the get-go anyway and wishing that it fails." Let's go on to one of the cities that some said was a favorite, some said was not, Indianapolis. They were trying to rally local support to get this done. Reportedly, in early November, they were very, very close to being team number 10. They had checks for about 2,500 season ticket deposits and 40 letters from local corporations pledging support. They were right there at the doorstep. A press conference was set for November 16th in New York, and everyone was expecting Chicago to be announced as one of the cities there. Kansas City and Tampa were the others that were being predicted in most reports at this time. Let's get to that press conference. Alan Rothenberg said, quote, "From the beginning, we have all said that it is far more important that we launch Major League Soccer right than do it on any particular preordained timetable. With the past history of unsuccessful soccer operations, it's particularly important that we get off to the right start." No surprise, then, that the announcement was the league's start would be delayed until 1996. They also announced that Chicago and Tampa would be joining the league. Long Island's entry, which was one of the original 7, was set to be delayed until 1997 or 98. So 7 minus 1 gets you to 6. Chicago and Tampa coming in gets you to 8. It was said that 10 to 12 teams could start in 1996, and at least 2 more cities would be named in 1996 for the future. An unnamed Japanese group made a cash commitment to the league, and commitment was a very specific word that was used. John Kluge of Metro Media, he was listed by Forbes magazine as the 3rd richest person in the country. Kluge, along with Stuart Subotnick, would be running the New York, New Jersey club. Lamar Hunt and his son Clark would run a team to be selected, and Rothenberg said that Lamar has his pick. API Soccer, which was a UK-based sports marketing company, would run the Washington club. LA Soccer Partners, which was headed by Mark Rappaport, would run the Los Angeles club. These groups each paid $5 million to become investor/operators. Lamar Hunt was quoted as saying, "We see soccer as a nice match with football for developing facilities and increasing utilization of stadiums since the schedules of the 2 sports are complementary." At this press conference, the door was also opened to possibly having Canadian cities involved. Rothenberg said that the plan was for 5 teams to be operated by the league, with 5 operated by investors. Charlie Stilitano was named the general manager of the New York, New Jersey franchise later in the month. Chicago, local reports had them set to play at Soldier Field. And then on November 17th, Richard Groff was in Atlanta for the Atlanta Ruckus introductory press conference in the APSL, and he said, "This team is the APSL's future. It's our future vision and our future model, and it will take us into a new and competitive era." It was a little bumpy getting the Ruckus on the field in 1995, and that might be a story for another day. Let's move into December of 94. The APSL had mentioned Long Island before, and they were looking at potentially putting a team at Downing Stadium. On December 12th, Daniel Van Voorhees sold the San Francisco Bay Blackhawks to Major League Soccer, and he became a limited partner in MLS under the terms of the deal. This was a really interesting one here. So the team would play in San Jose starting in 96 when the league launched. Van Voorhees had the opportunity to stay involved with the team if he wanted to buy the rights as an owner-operator. He had until January 15th to purchase those operating rights. Everybody talks about the first signing of MLS, and it's actually incorrect in a lot of ways. The 15 players that were under contract to the Blackhawks technically became the first players under MLS contract when this deal got done. Laurie Calloway was also under contract as coach. He became the first coach contracted to Major League Soccer. The team played in the APSL in 1992. In 93, they played some international games. They played in the USISL. They played a 4-game San Jose Cup. They didn't play in 94. The players that were under contract were sent out on loan. So MLS now has 15 players, and they have a coach, and they have a team that's going to be in San Jose, and another potential owner-operator in the mix. So that took us through 1994, and what started a year that was 1 year out from the relaunch of a nationwide, high-level, professional soccer league in this country, had ended in a very different way. The league got pushed back a year. You had an incomplete roster of teams. You had a handful of players now under contract. You had a coach under contract. You had owner-operators for some teams, not others. The amount of investment needed was constantly shifting. You had some cities that were really working hard to get a team, but were missing some pieces. Alan Rothenberg said this about his drive to launch Major League Soccer. "Believe me, there's been many a time I thought after the World Cup that I should just declare victory and go on to something else. But there's 2 parts to why I want to stay on and make MLS work. One is the sense of responsibility. The game plan from the beginning was to use the World Cup as the catalyst to build the first division professional league here. And it became pretty clear that if I didn't take the lead in doing it, it wasn't going to happen. The other is that I guess I've always enjoyed a challenge in my life, both from a business and a professional standpoint, and I'm sure nothing is going to be more challenging than this." And it was, and there were still more challenges to come. The roadmap is set now. Major League Soccer was going to start with 10 to 12 teams in 1996. There's 1 more year to go to get there. Players have to be signed. More teams need to be finalized. More investment is needed. Lots of different things were still on the table. And yeah, by the way, we're now 6 months after a World Cup that went very, very well and was far more successful than anyone expected. But all of that World Cup glow was starting to fade. Is that going to help MLS? Is that going to hurt MLS? Doesn't matter for MLS. We'll get into what 1995 looked like, and we'll structure it a little bit different. We'll kind of look at different categories of how things developed. along that road to year one of MLS. That'll be in an upcoming Soccer Files episode. Thanks for hanging out and listening. As always, if you have questions about anything we've talked about, please send it along. I'm on Twitter at Longshoe. You can also send us an email, soccerdownhere@gmail.com. Let us know if there are other Soccer Files kind of topics that you would like to hear more about. We'll complete the Major League Soccer story up to kickoff of Game 1, Year 1 in 1996 very soon. We've got some other things also in the works, so stay tuned to everything we're doing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for spreading the word. We could not do what we do without the support of our listeners. Thank you very much. We'll be back with another Soccer Files very soon.